Curiosity. Kill the rat. Curiosity. Kill the rat.
Sup guys, and welcome back to Curiosity Killed the Rat. We are here coming at you with episode 12.
Episode 12, that's a full dozen. Are we any
that's
cheaper?
a full... No.
We're not cheaper
Well,
by
I
the
mean,
dozen?
we were already free, so I got the joke. But...
That's right, we're as cheap as you can get. You can listen to Curiosity Killed the Rat for free on any streaming service.
Zero whole dollary
But you knew that already because you're listening to this right now.
Whoa. Fourth wall breaking. The fourth wall breaking. There's no fourth wall in a podcast.
There's no three
what
walls.
Am I on about?
There are no walls at all. There's no visual representation of anything.
You know what? So correct.
You make
So
the walls
correct.
with your mind, man. I suppose we should introduce ourselves.
We probably should. Sorry to anyone whose first episode this is, awkward one to come in on. But then again, not really, because this is who we are and how we are. We are weird. And you're going to get used to that. I'm Kate. I'm the resident scientist of the show. I'm an addiction neuroscientist, so I look at rats and alcohol. And my curiosity has killed one or two rats. Cough, cough, hence the name of the show.
Yeah, funny that.
I'm joined by my lovely co-host here.
G'day, my name is Matt. I am not a scientist myself, but golly heck, I do enjoy science. I enjoy learning all
Golly
things
heck!
science. Yeah, golly heck indeed, my guy.
So here we are back after going dark for an episode to help try raise awareness of the Black Lives Matter movement.
Yeah.
Stumbled over that because we think it's a really important issue and we didn't want to be stealing the thunder of the voices that really needed to be heard at that particular point in time.
Definitely.
And just to emphasize, just because we're back doesn't mean we don't think those voices need to be heard anymore. Those voices still need to be heard. They always need to be heard. They're going to need to be heard, just as much as our voices for the rest of time. That's kind of the point.
Exactly.
But nonetheless, we are back to our regularly scheduled programming where we are going to be talking to you about some fun science and answering a listener question and, the usual digs.
As much of a return to normalcy as one can be in this great year, 2020.
Gosh. Yeah, I say normal, but what the hell is normal for this year, right?
And I think that's all right, the world is going through
damn.
changes. That's the only way forward, right? The world has changed many times in the past as science has shown to us, and this is just another period of what's the word? A period of metamorphosis for the world, the planet, and societies as a whole. And honestly,
and I think it's
I'm
important
optimistic.
and needed, very, very needed in a lot of cases, in a lot of ways. But what blows my mind though is that even between you and I, Matt, you're over in Western Australia where you're pretty much COVID free and mingling with big groups of friends and back at the pub and all those fun things, whereas I'm in Victoria, where cases are spiking again. We're getting essentially a second wave and, I'm living in one of the hotspot council areas.
Yeah.
And so we've pretty much been put back into lockdown, except for, I still go into the lab, which I'm fortunate enough to be able to do. But, I'm not catching public transport. I'm actually running in because I'm a weirdo that likes doing that. But, it's still, and, I'm not allowed to work at my desk at uni. I'm still it's go in, do the lab work, come home, work from home. And it's weird because I'm we're in this accelerating, I'm panicking again state, whereas you're just
I'm in a very much everything's
swell and
sort
dandy.
of simmering down more or less. My work reopens again in a week. I work at a movie theater and we're gonna, start serving people of the public again. And it's been very interesting.
That's wild.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's just a fun little
Update
these little reflections at the start of each episode is just for our own benefit, listening back to our as we chronicle the year of 2020 through the lens of science.
Yeah.
Gosh.
Oh boy. And what a year for science it's been.
Anyway, today's topic, boomerangs and the science of boomerangs,
Ooh,
which is
it's
super,
really cool because
super interesting.
I have no freaking clue how boomerangs work, and I was a physics kid,
Nice.
But I never did
Yeah,
physics
no, I
advanced
had
enough
no
to
idea.
know how the aerodynamics of how they are actually able to fly and then do their iconic coming back to you thing. So I'm super interested to learn about it.
I didn't know either because I'm not a physics kid. As I said, I'm a neuro kid, but oh my gosh, the journey in learning all this has got me so enthused for just
Come
this
to the
is so cool.
Come to the side of physics. Yes.
Yeah, look,
Come to the superior science.
Do so much. Says the non-scientist.
Hey, I can still have passions about sciences.
Oh, you definitely can.
Thank you very much.
Can.
Don't put me in a box.
No, I wasn't saying you couldn't be enthused about it. You were just telling me to come to the science that you're not at. You know, you can't. You should say go to
no.
the physics.
It's just
right?
like
no,
you're
you're not at the physics. You're not a physicist.
It's sort of
my
like,
point.
well, look, it's just kind of like saying, you know, you play on the West Coast Eagles and I'm a Dockers supporter, and I'm like saying, hey, come watch the Dockers with me, and you're like, hey, how can you say you support the Dockers when you're not even playing for them?
Yeah,
I don't have to be a footy
that's
player to
valid.
watch the footy. I don't have to be a scientist to be like, hey, come join the physics dark side, you know?
I just want to like apologize to any international listeners that we have that are like, what the hell are these teams? What is this sport? What do Australians think is football? I don't understand.
I don't even watch it. I don't even watch sports. I don't watch footy. I just wanted to speak a language you would understand because you're the sporty one.
Yeah, no, because I do. I do watch sports. Okay, anyway, none of this is the point, except that you could say, did you know boomerang throwing is like now an actual sport? Like people do it for sport.
Oh, that makes sense, right? I mean, you've got archery as a sport and all of these old hunting things as sports now.
Yeah, it's really cool. And people like build different boomerangs that can do like different paths and stuff. And like, okay, I'm going to hit you just with some like fun facts about like boomerang world records. Because these things, like they fly and they fly well. And like, that's kind of the point. So aside from the whole they curve around, come back to you, I'm just going to straight up say not all boomerangs do that. So when we think of a boomerang, we think like, yeah, we think those things that do the cool thing that come back to you.
Those large wooden
and we
macaronis that always come back.
Yeah, and we often think of them as being like used for hunting, right? But the imagery that you kind of get is that they get thrown at, I don't know, say like a bird or something.
Yeah.
They hit the bird, kill it, and then come back to you. But like that's not, nah.
Right.
So there are boomerangs that are hunting boomerangs. They're not generally designed to come back to you. They're meant to fly.
Well, right, I suppose even if it's a boomerang
whack
that
your
could come back
target
to you,
and-
once it's hit it, that would throw off its momentum. It would just kind of like,
Exactly. So the returnee boomerangs and the hunting boomerangs are actually kind of distinct, but
right.
none of that's the point. The point of this is that they fly flippin' well. So the world record for the furthest distance that a boomerang has flown, is 427 meters, which like to conceptualize that. So a 400-meter running track is like a full like oval, right?
A full lap
all the way
around a
around.
standard oval.
Yeah, that's like a 400-meter running track.
Right.
So push that out into like a straight line, and that's like a lot. That's a pretty flippin'
That's
long way
nearly
for a
half a
tiny little bit of
kilometer,
wood to
like-
stay afloat. Yeah.
Man, you have to get
and
such a good arc on that.
Yeah, well, the time aloft record, so like the longest a boomerang has stayed in the air is 6 minutes.
Oh.
6 minutes.
You could listen to all of Eminem's Rap God in that time.
Yeah, I was thinking like Bohemian Rhapsody or something, but like that's a long that's a long song.
Yeah, that is a long time for something that doesn't have a motor to be able to be self-propelled through the air. Presumably, did they like throw it from the ground, or did they throw it off a really tall cliff or something?
I'm not sure.
Because I mean, gliders can stay in the air for a very long amount of time, and they don't have motors.
Yeah,
that's just
no.
because
I feel
they
like it
start
would have
really
been
high up,
it would have been from level. Yeah, no, it would have been from like level ground, and it would
like you could throw a boomerang out of like an aeroplane, and it would probably fall for a while, right?
Well, yeah, but no, I think it would have been from like standing on the ground,
Right,
flying.
right. That makes sense.
So, how do boomerangs fly? So before I explain how they do the cool rotatey turn back to you, land back in your hand, fancy magic stuff, which I will get to, because that ultimately is what piques people's interest, right? When they think about a boomerang, because they're just kind of like, oh yeah, you know, lots of things fly, like aeroplanes fly. Like, and the thing is, airplanes and boomerangs fly very much because of the same reasons. And it's because of the shape of their wings. So if you think about a boomerang, right, it's got essentially two wings that kind of join together at a point to form like an angle, a boomerang shape, but it's still two wings. A boomerangle. Yeah, they form a boomerangle. I like that. Okay, boomer. So airplanes. Airplanes also have two wings, but generally not at a boomerangle. They're, you know, yanked out to the side. But the shape of these wings is the same, and it's this fundamental shape that like is the reason they fly.
Right.
Right. So you've probably heard, we'll talk about an aeroplane for a second, right?
Yeah.
For an aeroplane to get off the ground, like there's four main sort of forces acting on an aeroplane, right? This
Mhm.
is like high school physics that I vaguely remember doing.
The word
You've got-
lift comes to mind.
Yeah, I was gonna say you've got your lift pushing up.
Yeah.
And then you've got like your drag and your thrust, and those aren't important. We're just going to talk about the lift. So the lift is the force that goes up against gravity and
Right.
and
So
well,
you've
lifts,
you've got the
lifts
thrust
airplane.
pushing the plane forward. You've got friction pushing against the plane in terms of air pressure.
Yeah.
You've got gravity pulling the plane down, and then lift
Yeah,
is what
and you've
actually
got
makes it
lift
fly.
pushing up.
That's what pushes up underneath it. So how is lift
Yeah.
generated?
So lift is generated by the shape of the wings, which are a
Right.
shape called an airfoil, and it's the same shape that the boomerang wings are,
Mm.
right? So an airfoil. This is where this becomes like a real challenge for me, because these things are very visual and they're really, really easy to understand if I could show you a picture, but I can't because it's a podcast.
The joys of
So-
the limitations of an audio medium.
But that's how we end up saying things like soap sperm, and it, it
Exactly.
feels a whole. And these are kind of spermy shaped as well, but not quite. So an airfoil.
It's the
is
fundamental
think
shape of life.
think of a teardrop shape, right? So let's just think of it vertically hanging, like a teardrop coming down or a raindrop or something, right? That like teardrop shape.
Yeah.
Now flip that 90 degrees so it's on its side. But like imagine you're putting it down flat on a table. So there's, I don't know, it's got a membrane or like a balloon or something holding it. So when you put it on its side, because of the weight, the bottom becomes flat, but the top is still that.
So it's like if you
Shape,
took a
right?
bisection of a raindrop shape down the middle. So
Yeah,
it's like
pretty much.
flat on the bottom.
So you've got a
and
flat
then-
bottom, yeah. So it's a sideways teardrop, like with a flat bottom, but then that teardrop curve. So it kind of curves
Right.
up, which is like the head, which is like, that's called the leading edge.
Okay,
And then
the
the
fatter bit.
trailing edge. Yeah, the fatter bit is the leading edge, and then it curves down into what's called the trailing edge.
Right.
And that is an airfoil shape, and that is like
Okay.
fundamental to making anything fly, or to generating lift anyway. I won't say anything fly because like birds
Right.
and other insects and stuff fly differently. But let's talk about, we're talking like airplane wings, we're talking helicopter blades, we're talking boomerangs.
Mhm.
Airfoils, super cool. So the reason that generates lift is it's traveling against the air. So if you think about an airplane, it needs like a runway, and it goes along the runway, and the air goes in the opposite direction. So the fat
Right.
end, the leading edge,
Yeah.
is charging at the air, and
Which
the
feels
trailing edge
counterintuitive,
is
right?
trailing
Because
behind.
at least in my mind, that feels counterintuitive.
Ah, does it?
Well, in terms of like just getting general aerodynamics, right? You want the pointy bit first, get the wedge in there so more air gets past you, just so you can go
Yeah.
faster. But that's not.
But think about like
that's not with the goal
think
of
about
generating
think
lift.
about like time trial. So we called them sperm helmets. I used to do context for anyone that doesn't know my life story. I used to do cycling when I was a junior in high school and stuff.
Mhm.
And when you see cyclists doing time trials and they have those helmets that have
Yeah.
they're like a head, and it trails off, right? We called
Right.
them sperm helmets because we were really mature.
Yeah.
But they're called aero helmets or spare whatever. But yeah, it's like the head,
Mhm.
but then it's got like a beak going backwards.
Right.
And it's that sort of shape, and you're charging the head and the tail. So like you might think, you'd want the beak forwards to kind of cut through the air, but that's not how it works, because
Right.
what happens with an airfoil as it's traveling in that direction through the air,
Mhm.
the air is going to hit the nose, right? It's going to hit that bulb at the end.
Yeah.
Half the air is going to have to get pushed up and go over. Half
Yeah.
of it is going to get pushed below.
Right.
And what happens, because of the curved shape of the top,
Mhm.
the air that gets pushed over the top travels faster and creates a lower pressure. Whereas the flat bottom bit that hits the flat bit, it travels slower than the top air and creates a higher pressure below the thing
So-
than above the thing.
Is it like higher pressure just because air is passing through there slower, but the same amount of air is still having to hit the front of it, and it keeps getting divided by two? So the slower air on the bottom kind of keeps having to build up and stack up against itself, meaning more air is getting kind of dense under there, which creates more pressure, whereas the top more air is being able to pass over it and get out of that kind of closed system there. So there's less air, therefore less dense, therefore lower pressure.
Good theory, but kind of backwards.
Okay.
So it's not the speed of the air that causes the pressure. It's actually the pressure gradient that causes the speed of the air. So if you
Oh.
think about it, think about, you know, you have a chamber, right? And the left-hand side of the chamber has high pressure, the right hand side of the chamber has low pressure, and you put something in it, the high pressure is going to push the particle towards the low pressure, right?
Right, it's going to like squeeze it
that's
out.
how it works, right? Yeah, because high pressure is going to try, you know, because fundamental things about like energy and particles and air is that they want to spread out evenly. They like being evenly sort of distributed.
Everything
and
tries to
dispersed,
tend
right?
towards equilibrium.
Exactly. So high pressure is going to high pressure is caused by like lots of air in a smaller space, right? And that's obviously going to want to move into areas of low pressure,
Right.
because there's less things in a like in
So
the
it
same
wants to
space,
fill that
right?
void. Yeah.
Yeah. So what actually happens is that pushes the air faster because it's actually the shape. It's that bulb head and then the specifics. I don't understand the actual like deep depths of the
Right.
engineering physics that causes it, but it's the shape that causes
Right.
the pressure. And you get higher pressure in that bit at the bottom, and
Okay.
you get, more importantly, lower pressure caused by the bulb. So the flat bit doesn't necessarily cause high pressure, but the curve,
Mhm.
the teardrop side, you know, the
Yeah.
slippery dip on the top, that causes low pressure, which
Right.
makes the air zoom down. And as
Right.
the air zooms down, it causes this sort of like, it pushes down on the trailing edge.
Mhm.
And because, you know, what is it? Every action has an equal opposite reaction.
Yeah.
The pushing down of air on the top and the higher pressure below pushes up
It's
from
sort
the
of
bottom and
like a
causes
seesaw
lift.
thing. So like
Yeah.
it's pushing down on one end of the seesaw, causing the other end of the seesaw to come up. But in this case, it's just each side of the wing, and that's lift. But it's just using the air pressure and air currents itself. Holy shit,
Yeah.
that's really cool. Holy shit.
So you can
that's
do this really cool experiment, right? I watched a YouTube video and like, okay, I'm going to do this. So on Zoom, Matt, you can see it. Everyone else will just hear it. But you can get a sheet of paper or like a strip of paper, right? I've just got a receipt here because that's just what happens to be on my desk. And I wasn't actually planning on doing this, but I'm going to see if it works for a demonstration. Strip of paper, just a little receipt. I'm holding it in front of my mouth, but just below my mouth. So it's like on my chin, right? And it's flopping down like a big old tongue.
Yeah, it looks like you've got a dog
gravity,
panting
right?
tongue, but just like stuck to your chin, and it's a receipt.
So if I blow, you know, with my mouth across a rush of air across the top of this flopping down, bending receipt, what do you think will happen based on what we just said? What's going to happen?
Well, I think the receipt is going to like become kind of taut and poke upwards, right? Because you're rushing
it's gonna lift.
air fast over the top, which is going to create a low pressure system there, thus creating a high pressure system underneath, which is then going to do the seesaw thing and push the end of the receipt up.
So ready?
Yeah. It worked.
Yeah. So like what you might initially, you know, intuitively think is that, okay, I'm blowing on top of the receipt. That's just going to blow it down. But I'm not blowing down. I'm blowing across the airfoil and it lifts up.
I just found a piece of paper in my room. It's just an A4 piece of paper that I folded in half a few times, so it's sort of a rectangle. And it's a bit stiffer, so it's not working as well, but...
Yeah, but it
still works. Oh, that's really cool.
So the point is, the wings of an aeroplane / the wings of a boomerang have that airfoil shape.
Right.
So when it flies through the air, we're going to ignore the, like, you know, the fact that it rotates and moves and has torque and curves. Think about just like a flat boomerang, like a stick with that airfoil shape. As it flies through the air, it's going to the wind's going to fly over those airfoils and it's going to create lift based on the low pressure above and the high pressure. And that's what keeps it in the air.
And in order to generate flight, you just need to create enough lift that's greater than the opposing force of gravity, because that's all you need to fight against, the constant force of gravity. And if you can achieve that...
So do you know what's wild?
What? The Thornberrys?
They found Aboriginal cave paintings from 50,000 years ago with pictures of boomerangs on it. So I think the oldest boomerang that we've found is about 20,000 years old, and it was actually found in
Wait,
Poland. But
50,000
there are Aboriginal,
There were mammoths
Australian
around back
Aboriginal
then.
cave paintings.
We're talking like
Really?
megafauna era, I'm pretty sure. I mean, I'll need
Yeah,
to fact
well-
check that, but like, yeah, no, definitely there would have been, because there were still woolly mammoths on the earth when the Great Pyramids of Giza were getting built, and that was like 4,000
Yeah.
years ago, I think.
Well,
or 5,000 years ago.
Yep.
This is
Indigenous
50,000
Aboriginal.
years ago.
50,000
Jeez.
years ago. Yeah. So like there's no guarantee
Oldest
that,
living
you know,
culture on the planet. That's crazy.
Yeah, well, I was gonna say, like, there's no guarantee that the boomerangs they were using 50,000 years ago had this airfoil shape, because we haven't found the actual boomerangs. We've just got paintings of that boomerang shape, which on a
Right.
cave you can't really tell whether it's got an airfoil or not. But it's like fairly safe to assume that, you know, they had to fly somehow, and this is how, you know, that's how it works. Someone just like made the right shape and was like, oh, this works. So like Indigenous people have maybe not necessarily understood the like nitty-gritty physics of this concept, but they understood that it worked, right? Like,
I think
how
humans
cool
are
is
good
that?
at having an intuition for
Yeah.
understanding physical concepts like this, and what science is just doing is finding a way to chronicle it and explain it in and understand the fundamentals, so we can then translate that and use it for other purposes and things. But we still have this innate understanding of how some of these physical forces work and act on us, because we are living in that physical world, and those forces act on us every day.
But I think this is where I'm going to take a brief like sidebar story, because I think it's important, especially within the current, you know, world that we live in. About David Unapon. So you might not have heard of David Unapon. I hadn't heard of him, but I realized I recognized his picture because he's the guy on the $50 note, the Australian $50 note.
Yeah.
So there's two
old
people
mate.
on the $50 note. You've got Edith Cowan on one side, and then you've got the guy, the Indigenous Australian David Unapon. And there's a reason that he's on there, because he was bloody brilliant. And if you didn't know what he was famous for, essentially he's famous for creating these like the modern sheep shears is his kind of biggest invention, but I don't think it's his most interesting. So he was an Aboriginal man, like I said, of the Ngarrindjeri people. Apologies if I pronounced that wrong. But he was essentially regarded as Australia's Da Vinci, or the Black Da Vinci, because he was an inventor, among other things. He was also, you know, he did some awesome things for advocating for Aboriginal rights, and, you know, he also wrote some books and stuff. But what I think is interesting is his science, or his inventions, because he's regarded as an inventor. And throughout his life, he I think it was 19 different like patents that he tried to get, and he ended up getting, you know, no financial support, no recognition for anything.
Right.
And a lot of this is because he was black, right?
Yeah.
So
Probably
it was
would have
actually
turned
a
out
headline.
quite different if he was a white scientist.
I definitely think so, right? There was a headline at the time, like in this tiny like newspaper article, right, talking about him and his science and stuff, where the headline was Australia's cleverest darkie.
Oh no. Oh, that's
so
not aged
bad.
well. That's a
Yeah.
bit. That's unfortunate.
Well, that's the thing. And then within that article, they refer to him as like a full-blooded Aborigine, because the whole thing was they thought full-blooded, quote unquote, Aborigines were not intelligent enough to understand Western science. That in fact required white blood, because only white blood was intelligent enough to understand this stuff. And so he was this amazing exception because, you know, he was a full-blooded Aborigine, but he was able to understand these concepts of Western science, which, you know, and he did this thing where he took these understandings of Western science. So he went and he learnt about, you know, science and physics and stuff from books from Europe. And then he applied them to Aboriginal knowledge. So stuff like the boomerang, right? And then he applied both this Aboriginal Indigenous knowledge and these like Western science concepts and mushed them together to come up with these really, really cool inventions that I think if we were a less racist country, we probably. So like, for example, this is how this is all relevant. So I said, you know, he was most famous for coming up with these like sheep shears, which that's because they took off.
Well, I imagine,
don't
they
think
must
that's
have
his
been really
coolest
big
idea.
for like the economy of Australia, especially around that time, because I think a huge
Yeah,
aspect
yeah.
was livestock and drovers and wool exports and that kind of thing.
Exactly.
So I don't know enough
so
about
that's what
sheep
his-
shearing, but I imagine it would be a pretty huge thing in the farming world.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And so, that's what he's most well known for, even though he didn't actually get the financial payout that he should have from his
Oh,
own
good.
invention,
Nice.
because
I mean,
once
why
again,
would he?
black guy. Why would he? He was a
Gosh.
full-blooded Aborigine. But no, this is how this is all relevant to boomerangs. He did this so the first ever helicopter to be, created was in 1936. In 1914, 22 years, like 2 whole decades before the first helicopter, David Unipon conceptualized the helicopter. And he did this by applying the physics of a boomerang, a spinning boomerang, how it lifts and also how it returns. And he applied this to the concept of a flying machine, which we now, is now the basis of a helicopter. So that's where the whole black Da Vinci thing comes from.
Right, because Da
Australian
Vinci had early
Da
plans
Vinci
for a
also
helicopter and
theorized,
stuff as well.
conceptualized. Yeah, but this is back David Unipon didn't, just steal Da Vinci's ideas, because this wasn't necessarily he didn't necessarily have access to that.
Yeah.
So of his own. So there's a quote. I found a quote that was published in a newspaper article that's a David Unipon quote where he says, "An aeroplane can." This is 1914. Remember, 22 years before the first.
That was
helicopter.
just
so
before the
airplanes
World War I,
existed.
right?
Oh, you're testing my history knowledge of dates, and it's embarrassing how bad I am at it. So
I'm pretty sure
maybe?
World War One started in 1914. I'm
That
gonna
sounds
die on this
familiar.
hill.
So, the David Unipon quote. So he says, "An aeroplane can be manufactured that will rise straight into the air from the ground by application of the boomerang principle. The boomerang is shaped to rise in the air according to the velocity with which it is propelled, and so can an aeroplane." And he had all these diagrams of it and stuff, and
So what did it look like? Was it just like a couple of boomerangs on top of the thing, like a helicopter, or did it have more of a VTOL style vibe where it still had wings like an aeroplane but could also lift up off the ground?
No, so it didn't have side wings. The wings were the propeller of the boomerang principle, the airfoil, he understood this concept of lift and the airfoil shape. I don't know if he had the language for it then. I'm not sure if they called it an airfoil. I'm not sure when that language came in, but he understood the concept of this shape and the pressure difference and the force of lift and how the spinning and the velocity can cause that direct vertical lift. Because airplanes, right, need a long runway because their wings stick out to the side and they need the wind. So they need to be traveling forward very fast along a runway so that they get enough wind going backwards against the airfoil of their wings to cause them to lift. Whereas he's like, dude, if we just spin them above the thing, it'll just go straight up.
Well, because, a boomerang goes a lot further than like a paper aeroplane, I imagine, right?
Yeah.
Because a boomerang spins around, which I guess, that's like a helicopter blade, right?
That's exactly...
Yeah.
So helicopter blades, if you actually look at helicopter blades, they are all airfoils as well. So much like a boomerang and much like airplane wings, you can think of helicopter blades as just super skinny airplane wings stuck to a rotor in the middle, and they spin. And that spinning motion moves them against the air, so the air rushes over the airfoil.
So it can generate its own
the
lift. It doesn't need the speed of actually moving through space to do that, because it can do that in a closed system thanks to the power
so
of
an
circles.
aeroplanes have these engines that create thrust to kind of push them forward. Helicopters don't need that. The helicopter engine is all about spinning that rotor, and the spinning of that rotor creates the thrust, essentially.
And that's why the
flow.
turning propeller on the back is 90 degrees in the other way, because it just
So
generates
the helicopter
lift
doesn't...
that just pushes either side, right?
Yeah,
so that's how
and
it
that back propeller is actually important. So once again, it comes back to that whole every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So if you think of a helicopter and a blade above it, the blade spinning one way there would be just as much force of the helicopter spinning the other way. So if you didn't have that back propeller, the blade would spin one way, and then the helicopter would spin the opposite direction.
Because otherwise the helicopter would just be spinning around in the air.
Yeah, so that back tail propeller is actually to counteract that and hold the helicopter straight. And then
cheeky.
Helicopters aren't steered by that back thing. That back thing is just to hold it straight. It's actually steered by tilting the top blade. So you've got, your two boomerangs tied together that rotate. And then as you tilt the different angles, that moves the helicopter in different angles. And that's the same principle as why a boomerang will come back to you. because of gyroscopic. It's called gyroscopic precession.
Real quick
right?
before back to boomerangs, I just thought the shape of a helicopter itself sort of looks like an airfoil, right? If you think about how helicopters are shaped, they've got that
Oh, yeah.
big bulb at the front, and then they go and taper out the back until there's a big, long, skinny tail. The helicopters are just like one big airfoil.
I guess in a way, yeah. I don't know because it's not like super smooth. I don't know whether it causes that same like pressure gradient or whether
But
it's
it might
just,
help,
like, I
right?
don't know.
As you're going forwards, create a little bit
Possibly,
of lift.
yeah.
Or
I
maybe
don't
it's
know.
just
Nothing.
basic aerodynamics.
I was going to say nothing that I read specifically said that the shape of a helicopter, had extra lift, but possibly. But yeah, so how do boomerangs come back to you? How do helicopters turn? How did David Unipon understand all of this? And why did nobody take him seriously? Because he was black. But so how does this work? When you think about it, throwing a boomerang, it has two different movements, right? Two very distinct movements. It has the forward movement because you've thrown it forward. So it's traveling from you in, a line away from you, which then curves around. But we'll ignore before the curve, it's got that forward direction, forward speed. It also has a rotational speed because you flick the wrist as you throw it. It tumbles through the air.
Yeah.
It spins. And that's fundamental to making the thing, to creating
Generate
that
lift.
gyroscopic precession. Well, no. The lift is from the air rushing over the airfoils.
Right.
The curving is from the gyroscopic precession, which is important in having that rotation. So think about your boomerang. You're holding the bottom wing. It's coming and it's coming back towards you, curving, and then the top wing is pointing up away from you.
Right.
Yes?
Yeah.
You throw your boomerang. It starts rotating. You have a top wing and a bottom wing because you throw them it's not directly vertical that you throw them. You throw them at about a 20-degree angle. Because if you throw them flat, if you think about it, if you throw them flat like a frisbee, that's not going to work because all the lift will be below it and the thing will just go up and then fall. And that's not very convenient or good or efficient. So you throw it at this angle so that there's just enough lift that it stays up, but it's also tilted, right? So you throw it. Now the top arm is moving faster than the bottom arm. And I'll explain how.
Okay.
So the top arm, it's rotating away from you and it's also being thrown away from you. So the two different movements that it's got, the away from you movement and the spinning movement, the rotational movement, add together essentially, right? So it's moving really fast away from you because it's both rotating away from you and traveling away from you.
Yep.
The bottom arm is moving slower because it's rotating towards you but being thrown away from you. So they kind of subtract from each other.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
I
So
think
the top arm's moving really fast because it's moving. So they're rotating. The top arm and the bottom arm are rotating at the same speed.
Yeah.
But one of them is getting also thrown at the same direction and the other one's getting thrown in the opposite direction.
Man, this is bringing me back to high
Have I
school
lost
physics
you?
learning. No, it's reminding me of like learning about vectors and all that sort of stuff.
Oh,
Like
yeah. I mean,
and
all
velocity,
of that's...
the idea of
Because I'm Vector, I commit crimes with magnitude and direction.
Yeah, and that was like a weird concept like that I didn't
Best
fully
joke.
understand until I did
Love that
physics. The
movie.
idea of what differentiates, I think, a vector from, I can't remember what the other one is. One just has a force behind it, but a vector has force and direction. And direction is a huge, important aspect when it comes. So, like, that's the difference between speed and velocity. Speed is just a magnitude, whereas velocity is magnitude and direction. So, yeah, I'm getting it. It's giving...
Yeah. So, like, vectors are, an important part of this, and that's why the top arm is moving faster than the bottom arm, because like if you just say, oh, the top arm's moving faster than the bottom arm, is like that, it takes a bit of thinking to wrap your head around
until you explained
Yeah.
that.
So that's once again really hard to explain without a visual, so hopefully I've done an all right job.
Right.
Okay, so you've got these two arms of the boomerang moving at different speeds. That's the important part, is that the top arm is moving faster than the bottom arm. If you don't quite understand why or how, I'll link some good YouTube videos in the description that also have visuals that might help you wrap your head around it a bit better. But going back to our airfoil principle and lift. So the shape of the airfoil, so there's a few different things that change how much lift is generated. So assume that the shape of the airfoil stays constant, because it does, because on both wings of the boomerang, the airfoil is the same. And also it's rotating. So which one's the top and which one's the bottom changes depending on, how far, what point in time you're at.
Yeah.
So that's the same. So a couple of different things can change how much lift is generated. One of them is what's called the angle of attack. So how tilted that airfoil is compared to the direction that it's traveling. That way it's not so much important, because the second one, which is what is important in boomerangs, is the speed that the air is traveling against the airfoil. So the faster the aeroplane is traveling or the airfoil is traveling through the air, the more lift is going to be generated, which is why airplanes go like really fast on takeoff, because they need to get that speed to generate enough lift to get them off the ground and to counteract the force of gravity, so the weight of the airplane or the boomerang.
Right.
So now, remember how I said the two wings of the boomerang are moving at different speeds?
Yeah.
So that means that there's a different amount of lift affecting each wing of the boomerang. So the top arm that's moving hella fast will have more lift. The bottom wing that's moving hella slow will have less lift. Yeah?
Yeah. Yeah.
So this differentiation in how much lift is being generated is what kind of causes it to curve. It generates what's called torque, which, that's when we get into vectors, and you can talk about how the torque, is at an angle perpendicular to the direction of that gets into deeper physics than I, want to go into on this podcast.
Yeah.
But as the lift is differentially affecting the two different arms of this boomerang, the top arm is going to come round and it's going to angle it. And so instead of just traveling straight ahead, because you've got this different amount of lift, it actually curves around straight back to you. And that's called gyroscopic precession, where it just goes and does that make sense? Did that make sense to you? Did I lose you on that? Because the top's moving faster than the bottom.
Yeah. So that's what gyroscopic blah 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 is.
So yeah, gyroscopic precession. I guess I haven't really explained what that is. I think because I didn't really want to get into the physics of the vectors and the angles and the fact that, but yeah, I'll give you a way to visualize it, to conceptualize it. So gyroscopic precession, essentially, it's to do with taking into account the fact that something is spinning. So a really good example, and like a classic sort of way that's used to explain this is a spinning bicycle wheel, right? And normally they do the experiment where you hang the spinning bicycle wheel and you spin it. But I want to ignore that, and I want you to just think about like a spinning bicycle wheel, but just like riding a bike or motorbike, right? You ride motorbikes. I ride motorbikes. For me, visualizing like a motorbike was the best way to understand this. It was like a light bulb moment. So you're there on your motorbike. The wheels of the motorbike are spinning, are rotating. So they've got this like rotational motion. So what that means is that when you apply a sideways force to the top of the wheel, so say you lean your whole bike to the left, right?
Yeah.
You're essentially placing a sideways force on the top of the wheel. So if that wheel wasn't spinning, if you just had like a motorbike just standing there not moving, you push it sideways, it's gonna fall over sideways.
Yeah.
But when you're moving, that's not what happens.
Right.
And that's because of this gyroscopic precession. What happens? You tell me, Matt, what happens when you lean your bike to the left? What happens?
You turn to the left.
You turn to the left, almost as though you've pushed the force at so the left force is like at the tip of the wheel, right? As though you've turned your handlebars to the left. But you haven't done that. You haven't turned your handlebars to the left. You haven't pushed the end of the wheel. You've pushed the top of the wheel, but you've turned left. And that's because of this rotational thing. So, okay, this is where now your motorbike is the boomerang.
Okay.
So we've got this boomerang rotating through the air. Now, I already explained how the top one has more lift than the bottom one because it's moving faster. So what is lift? Lift is just a force
It's
that's
an
pushing
off-brand
it,
version of solo.
right?
Sorry.
Yeah, okay. But it's a force that's pushing the side of the boomerang in a certain direction.
Right.
So the top of the boomerang is getting pushed more than the bottom because there's more lift at the top. So it's like you're tilting it sideways. So you've got this spinning rotational boomerang that's spinning like the spokes of your motorbike wheel, right? Rotating through the air. And the more lift at the top is getting pushed. So instead of the boomerang falling flat like a pancake,
because it's got
it
momentum,
turns to the left,
and moves
or it turns
through
to the
air.
right. Yeah. It turns to the left because it's getting pushed by more lift from the left at the top.
Right.
Just like a motorbike, but
Or a
it's a
bicycle.
boomerang.
There you
Or
go.
anything, because gyroscopes, right?
Gyroscopes, wheels, physics. It's universal,
Physics.
quite literally.
Yep. But there's so many things. Like, you have to throw it at just the right angle with just the right speed, just the right spin, which
I've
is why
never
it's a sport
successfully
and why
been able
it's,
to
you know,
throw a boomerang back to me.
Yeah, me neither. Me neither, but I also, like, I think I never learnt about any of this, like, airfoil wing. Like, I don't know if I was throwing it right or the spin. And I think now that I understand it, I kind of want to get my hands on a boomerang and give it a go again now that I understand the things that need to, you know, be in place in order to create that effect that you want. Like, that'd be cool, right? Yeah, so that's pretty much, that's boomerangs. And like, yeah, there was a lot in that I think is hard to get without the visuals. So I'm just gonna like chuck a bunch of. I watched a lot of videos, and that's what helped me wrap my head around it. So I'm gonna chuck a bunch of links in the description, for you to watch some videos that might help explain it better. But you know, hopefully you got enough of an understanding. Yeah, because
I mean,
it's so cool. I think it's
so
so cool. Anyway,
no, that's crazy. No, I didn't. It all makes sense now. Let's say we're just about at the time to shuffle along to the old listener question. Man, it's been a little bit since we've seen one of these.
Question. Yeah. So, you know, for those of you who haven't listened to us before or only maybe listened to our last couple of episodes, normally what we do is we tackle a listener question at the end of each episode. And so the listener question I have today is from Sam. And it's, what exactly are hiccups? And is there any scientifically proven way to get rid of them?
Right.
So,
I have no
let's start
idea.
Yeah? Cool. This will be fun then. Hiccups. We'll start with the what are they first, right? So they're essentially an involuntary spasm of the muscle that makes you breathe. So there's a muscle that sits, like it's like a sheet, like a dome sort of sheet that sits at the bottom of your lungs, and it's called your diaphragm.
Yes.
Right? And so when this muscle
diaphragm.
Familiar with the diaphragm? Cool. So when the diaphragm contracts, right, that's what expands your lungs and the air rushes in, and then when it relaxes, your lungs get smaller and the air comes out. And you know, breathing, it's a nifty thing. So the diaphragm, it's a useful muscle to have. So hiccups is when the diaphragm muscle, it like spasms. And so the diaphragm will spasm, and then that'll lead to what happens immediately after the diaphragm spasm is that like your vocal folds. So there's like, you've got these two little vocal folds like in your throat, and there's a gap between them that's called the glottis, and the vocal folds immediately like clamp shut, and the glottis like closes, and that causes the like sound.
Right. So is that whole collective thing? That's the vocal cords. That's what the vocal cords are. The vocal folds and this other thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So the diaphragm spasms.
Close when the diaphragm spasms? Why do they do that?
That is a really good question that people don't necessarily understand or agree with.
Okay.
So there's actually, okay, sidebar, I wasn't necessarily going to talk about this, but it's interesting, right? So there are a couple of, there's sort of two main different theories about like why this has evolved to this mechanism has happened. So one of them is to do with, so we know that babies and infants like hiccup a lot, and they like in the womb, when before babies have even been born, they hiccup and they hiccup a lot more, you know, when you're young, and when you're older you don't hiccup as much. Right. And so one of the thought, and they looked at, there was a study done like last year, pretty recently, where they looked at, you know, the brain activity of hiccuping babies essentially, and they found that, you know, the neural activity in the brain when a hiccup happened was a lot to do with the processing of the like hic sound. And what the researchers think is that this like diaphragm spasm and then the hic noise actually then teaches children to associate like that sound with the muscle movement and helps build neural networks that help us then like understand these internal body sensations. So we use the hic sound to then go, oh, something weird happened with my diaphragm. Oh, I'm suddenly aware that my diaphragm exists, and it essentially teaches children how to breathe. Teaches babies how to
Ah.
control their diaphragm and to like, become aware of it, and therefore, control. Yeah, so that's one of the theories. We don't necessarily know. And then, humans, what am I saying? We're all humans. Adults
Mm.
weren't able to shake that thing because it's just and so this whole like diaphragm pairing with the sound helps babies learn how to breathe. The other theory is that it was actually in evolution, it was like a thing left over from evolution that we don't really use anymore because, and it was from when we were before creatures were on land, when we lived in the sea, it
Mhm.
was beneficial to be able to like, or as we were just like emerging from the sea, sorry, to like take a gulp of air, but then have the glottis closed straight away to stop any water rushing into the lungs. So
Right.
it's this like breathing, but then closing, which is, there's a little, I don't know, there's still some evidence to suggest that maybe that sort of mechanism stems from there, but I think the babies one is a leading theory at the moment. But essentially we don't know. We don't really
Right.
understand why it happens. All we know is that it does. And
Okay.
that's what the hiccup is. It's a spasming diaphragm followed by the
So what sort of
glottis
things can cause your
clamping shut.
diaphragm to spasm like that? How come it happens if you like
Um,
drink lots or something like that?
Well, yeah, so like think about the things that people generally associate with causing hiccups. It's, you eat or drink too quickly, so that stretches your stomach, and your stomach is right below your diaphragm, so the stretch of the
Okay.
stomach, has been suggested to sometimes like trigger this like spasming of the diaphragm, or like really intense emotions like sobbing that, uses these muscles of your body as you're like crying and sobbing, and that can sometimes lead to hiccups
Mm.
because you're
Right. Yeah,
using
that
these
makes
muscles in a
sense.
way that's, they're not
Oh, just
necessarily
like
not
any
regularly
muscle,
used
if
in,
you
right?
like overuse it, you can cause spasms, including the
Yeah,
diaphragm.
exactly. And
Mm.
so that's what a hiccup is.
Mm.
What the second part of the question, like, is there a scientifically, proven way to get rid of them?
Mm.
Yes and no. So there's theories as to why, hiccup cures that people swear by, why they make sense and why they may help, but science hasn't necessarily, proven one to be completely effective 100% of the time, or any to be
Mhm.
better than the others. So like, let's think about some of the common known cures for hiccups. So you've got the jump scare. That's the obvious one that everyone knows. You scare someone,
Mhm.
your hiccups go away. Essentially, that one works on the principle of like distracting your it's essentially distracting your nervous system,
Mm.
because when every muscle requires nerve activation in order to do the thing, and the diaphragm is controlled by what's called the vagus nerve, which kind of travels down your neck, and it's controls your breathing and a couple of other key things. um and so by scaring someone, you kind of activate the fight or flight response, and
Mhm.
the whole like theory is that it distracts the nervous system and like reboots it enough to stop the spasming and the overshooting of diaphragm.
Mhm.
Then like there's also apparently if eating a spoon of like peanut butter, or I read eating a teaspoon of sugar. I've never actually heard this one, but
Yeah, me
you know,
neither.
it's like eating something that's a little bit weird and uncomfortable. So like
Mm.
swallowing a whole like spoon of sugar granules, or a
Okay.
spoon of peanut butter, or you know, it's a weird enough sensation that it essentially, the theory is it distracts your vagus nerve and draws, so that
And what
it
about like our childhood remedy that we've always used of
the
drinking water
cup the
upside
water.
down? Yeah.
Yeah. So drinking water upside down, or even just drinking a really big glass of water, or holding your breath, they
Mhm.
all work via a similar principle of they increase the amount of CO2 in your body. So think about it. You're drinking a massive glass of water.
Mhm.
The drinking upside down kind of combines the fact that it contracts your muscles in a weird way, plus um, it stops you breathing. When you're drinking, you're not breathing, right?
Right.
When you're holding your breath, you're not breathing. When you're not breathing, you're not getting any extra oxygen in.
Right.
But respiration is still happening in your lungs, so you're
Mhm.
producing CO2. So when
Right.
you hold your breath or drink a big cup of water or whatever,
Mhm.
there's going to end up with more CO2 in your body and less oxygen.
Right.
Now, the cool thing about like breathing, it's not actually, so when we, are desperate for air, like say we're drowning, not to be morbid, but any instance where you're like gasping for air, it's not because your body's gone, shit man, don't have enough oxygen. It's actually because your body's gone, shit man, I have too much carbon dioxide.
Right.
And that's what regulates our breathing, is we have sensors for how much carbon dioxide, and when we have too much carbon dioxide, we go, oh shit, need oxygen, or
Right.
we need to expel the carbon dioxide. So holding your breath or drinking water or whatever, it builds up the amount of like carbon dioxide that's in your body, and therefore essentially like tells your breathing mechanism to get its shit together. Like it's
Right.
pretty much like, it's like, man, we need to regulate this. Your breathing's not working properly. We have too much carbon dioxide. And so by regulating your breathing, because the diaphragm is the muscle responsible for, regulating your breathing, it kind of reboots the system. And yeah. And so that's why those ones. Yeah. So
Well, there you go.
that's essentially it, right? There's no sort of proven, so a lot of ambiguity in that answer. No, we don't really understand why we hiccup or how that, why that happens, and no, we don't have a scientifically proven way to fix it, but we do, because it's one of those things. As
That's
far
just
as
science.
medical conditions go, hiccups are not super concerning. Like, they're
Right.
uncomfortable, they're annoying, but they normally go away pretty quickly. It's only very rarely that people have these issues where they hiccup for weeks and weeks or sometimes years on end, right? That happens very, very rarely. And even when it happens, like, it's annoying, but it's not going to kill you. Like, it's
Right.
not that bad. So there's not a lot of research as
Done
to
into the science of hiccups. Yeah.
because it's just not a priority, right? Like, I talk about funding and research a lot, and a lot of, part of science is convincing people that your research is worth funding. And I guess
Right.
hiccups and people in the hiccup
Just
science
generally
world
curiosity is not a big enough reason for people to want to
No.
fund your research.
Yeah, there's not huge philanthropic organizations that are like, oh, I know someone that died of the hiccups. Here, find a cure. Like, that is the answer to the question. So hopefully that answered your question, Sam. But, if you guys have a question, a listener question, any question at all, science related preferably, you can email us at curiosityrat@gmail.com, and we'll tackle those questions in a future episode. I love getting questions. Shoot them at me, fam. Yeah.
Hell
and,
yes.
if you enjoyed the show, you want to find us more, you want to see more of our content, keep your finger on the pulse of what we're up to. You can find us on social media. What the hell is that? Why can't I word? Why
It's
did we
social
start a
media that's a
podcast?
little bit more soulful.
Yeah, social media. You
Social
can find
media.
us on the Twit.
Oh no.
Who am I?
Oh, I don't like that. I don't like that at all.
Nope.
The twit,
I am.
the inst, and the face.
Yep, you can find us on the Twit at Curiosity Rat, on the Inst at Curiosity Rat, or on the Face Curiosity Killed the Rat. We're a Facebook
And not to
page.
mention that you can listen to us on the Spot, the app, the Sound, or the U. So just to translate, that's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, and YouTube.
Yeah,
I just wanted to stay in theme with,
I
that
think
brilliant
people probably
naming
got-
structure you had. Thanks everyone for listening. Catch you next fortnight.
Bye.
Curiosity. Kill the rat. Curiosity. Kill the rat.